Great. So we just watched a lesson where it seemed to be high school students engaging in a lesson with a teacher. This is going to be starting the debrief process in the ELO process. So where any observers will come back together to reflect on the evidence they saw in the classroom. So we're actually going to do a round robin. So take about 30 seconds right now to kind of just look over and remind yourself of the evidence that you saw, and we'll kind of share our evidence to come to consensus of what we might think would be most impactful for the teacher to hear. Give me a thumbs up when you are ready. Great. All right. So in this debrief process, we're again going to be thinking of the quantity of students impacted, the specific evidence, and then the potential impact. For example, I might start off with learning was effective for students like Jennifer, Nix, Dominic, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing their names incorrectly, for students like them who explained their rationale on why they were moving from location to location.
I would say that learning was most effective for all students because they were able to move from one area to the classroom to state their position. So for those who they were not talkers, the movement of their body still was a part of participation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say that. Well, I would say, and I don't know if this is similar to what Angela said, that learning was best when all students were able to participate. And it was a voluntary kind of thing. They didn't necessarily were, called out, put on the spot. Everyone moved at the same time, right? And so it allowed for that psychological, emotional safety to take place.
Exactly.
I also think it was learning was effective when the teacher kind of cold called the students to respond. So even after they moved, they still had to be ready to respond because she would call on anyone at that moment.
Nice, Angela. That's a really good observation. And again, because it is the ELO process, let's try and reframe the language. Rather than learning was effective when the teacher cold called, how did it impact students? Where was students? How could we reframe that kind of thinking? Because that's really important observation to share.
I think learning was most effective because students had to be prepared to defend their position once they arrived at their spot.
Yes. So learning was effective for the students who were able to respond to an ethical question, or?
I think what I'm saying is that it was effective because the students knew that once they got to their spot, that the teacher could call on them at any time. So it was effective because they had to be prepared to defend their position based on where they stood.
Yes. And I'm sorry, I'm still pushing this. Are you thinking about learning was effective because students knew the routine, or students knew how to respond, or both?
I think it was effective because they knew how to respond. They knew that that was a high expectation of them to respond and defend. Because in the beginning, she goes, you're going to move, you're going to stand for what is right. And so they knew that they had to be able to stand for what was right through their words as well as their movements.
Mm-hmm. I think, too, learning was effective because students were able to share their personal experience and share their voice related to the thing that the teacher was asking them about. So they were able to make connections, right?
Exactly, Antoinette. Anything else where learning was effective for?
I think learning was effective for most of the student because the topic was relevant.
And how do we know that the topic was relevant?
It appeared to be something that they all could relate to.
Great. So we could say that learning was effective for the students that, like you said before, moved physically with their bodies and also orally responded or knew what to do. Exactly. Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Learning was most effective because all students were able to see and read the prompt that the teacher put on the board for them to respond, right? So you're addressing those different learning styles and, different types of learners.
That's a good one, Antoinette.
Exactly, Antoinette. And that's a really good point in this process because we're all educators. We know where our thinking is going, that learning is effective for students who have multiple learning styles, but you're bringing it back into specific evidence that you saw, that when we feed back to the teacher, they might not take it as personally of saying, I really liked how you created an opportunity for all learning styles, or why that you put the sentence stems on the board. No, we observed and noticed evidence that all students were able to see the board and read the prompt independently as they orally heard.
Mm-hmm.
Nice noticing. Something that might come up would be something very kind of granular, but if you are working with a teacher who wants to be pushed even farther, you might want to share something like learning was effective for some of the students that knew literary terms like situational irony.
Mm. Okay.
So it sounds like we have shared all of the evidence we think that was learning was effective for the teacher. Now let's move on to evidence of where we thought learning could be more effective.
I'll start. I thought learning could have been more effective for students if the teacher had connected the question to the essay that they were going to write about. Because she shifted to this isolated question to taking them back to the lesson that they taught about. They had been taught to start thinking about how you can make this a persuasive essay. And so if the question had been connected to the essay, it would have been more of a seamless process.
Good. And again, you're going for that rationale again. Rather than saying learning could have been more effective if the teacher did something, try and put it in language of the students. So learning would be more effective for the student.
Were able to make connections to the essay in which they were going to write about.
Beautiful, Andy.
This takes a little time.
It does. It's a really hard shift to go away from the teacher because we've been kind of almost primed and been in education where these kinds of observations occur a lot. But I think in a lot of experiences, hearing from teachers who are familiar with the ELO process have expressed that they find this process easier and more beneficial to kind of develop and push their practice farther because it's listening to colleagues that is a non-threatening environment and also focusing on the impact of learning onto students.
Mm-hmm. I would say learning is it more effective or could be more effective?
Okay.
Learning could be more effective if students had an opportunity to share their responses or collaborate with their peers before reporting out to the general class.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and that would kind of help, relieve some anxiety, kind of just have a peer check about, what I feel or what I'm thinking. So I think it would be more effective if they had that opportunity to collaborate.
I like that a lot, Antoinette, because that would also afford the students the opportunity to change their stance. So
Mm,
after they had that conversation with other students, they may decide like, no, I don't agree with you guys, and change their stance to another place.
Nice.
very good point. Very good point.
And we know where this is going is going to be increasing rigor, connecting to
Yes.
common core standards where you have to explain and hit what you were saying earlier, Angela, of talking that it's going to be moving towards persuasion. So about having this kind of pros and cons or ways to actually support an opinion that you might not agree with evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah, it would give the students an opportunity to learn what some of the opposing views are. And when they
Mm-hmm.
write their opinion paper, to be able to strike that down. I think it's called the straw man approach, where I know what you're saying, but I'm going to strike it down, which makes your opinion paper or persuasive paper even that much stronger.
Mm.
Exactly. I think the only thing that was on my mind was learning could have been more effective if all students had more opportunity and time to write. Because the
Yeah.
majority of what we saw was a lot of kind of the prep to the course.
Mm-hmm.
But again, this might not be something you want to share with the teacher because it might not be as impactful because the ELA process is only looking at a snapshot of learning, that it could be a wondering that you might say, I'm assuming like what would you do with your students next? Like if we were in your classroom tomorrow or in 20 minutes, what might we see? So kind of engaging the teacher rather than putting an assumption that like, oh, we didn't see writing, you're not, having opportunities for writing. So again, giving the benefit of the doubt and understanding that the teacher might have that plan and we just didn't see it yet.
Okay.
I have another one. I was just thinking learning could have been more effective if students had an opportunity to define vocabulary that was being used in the discussion about the theme. So, for instance, the whole word of irony and situational irony, it was defined by the teacher. That was the list that she carried. But allowing the students to demonstrate their understanding by defining it, and maybe you could have had other students chime in or push back, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, that would have been nice. That's cool. That's a good one.
Right. So now that we shared all of the types of evidence, now it's time to look at what we jotted down to come to consensus about which feedback would be most impactful for the teacher to receive. Again, this process is not prescribed. However, in some experience, often people feedback maybe 3 to 4 statements of learning was effective and 1 to 2 where learning could be more effective. But again, this whole debrief conversation and why we try to spend more time to reflect on it, on what we saw, is to see what statement would be most impactful for the teacher. So take a few moments and kind of look through your notes and let's just highlight some statements that we think we would want to share with the teacher. All right. So learning was most effective for.
I really like learning most effective when all students were able to participate through movement.
How do you feel about that, Antoinette?
No, I think I can go with that because even if I don't speak it, I can demonstrate it and not
Mhm.
feel as if I'm doing it by myself. So I'm gonna never say anything, but my physical movement to that part of the room lets you know where I stand, right?
Right.
Nice.
So it's safe.
It is safe, and this will be a nice affirmation for the teacher.
Yeah.
We talked about learning is effective for students who had the opportunity to share their ideas, where students could see and read the prompt, share personal experiences, where they were engaged in relevant learning.
How many do we want to share for most effective?
It's totally up to us, right? About again, I think if we think that there might be more impact on where learning could have been more effective to help support and drive the teacher, we could just share one or two more of the positive impacts, to have that kind of more leeway with that time with the connection, because the teacher might again already know all these things, and it would just be a nice affirmation to hear again.
Um, I'm going to go with the learning is most effective when students are able to read um, the prompts or the information on the board, because I mean, I guess it's a personal preference because I'm a visual learner, right? So to hear people talking to me, sometimes it doesn't make sense. I have to see something. So I'm just thinking about all of us who are those visual people, right? In order for me to process, I have to see something. And
I would agree
I
with
think
that
that
because
would,
that helps the different learning modalities to make sure you're meeting the diverse needs of students in the classroom.
mhm. Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's simple, right?
Yeah.
It's not a heavy lift.
Um, I think maybe then I would just say learning was most effective when all students were engaged in rigorous but relevant questions. So again, going into that whole philosophical and ethical, being able to make the connections, what Angela was saying earlier.
Cool. So when we share these, do we just share them or do we give the, like we are discussing why we chose that? Do we give that to the teacher as well when we share the strengths?
That's a really great question, Angela.
Mm-hmm.
In the ELO process, the answer would be no. So
Mm.
the rationale for that is that we believe that all teachers are professionals and they have a toolbox of strategies and know what to do. This is just an opportunity for other sets of eyes and perspectives to see what's going on in a classroom that a teacher might just not see at the time because he or she might be working with a group of students, or he or she just might not be as attuned to certain kind of areas. So instead, we will, as when we feed back to the teacher, only be saying the statements and giving extended wait time for the teacher to process. And the rationale of why we actually include specific names of students is so to help the teacher remember, what part of the lesson are we talking about it, so they can make those connections. So you're absolutely right. As when we go into the feedback, it might get kind of awkward in the beginning once people get used to the process, but we want to stay away from giving our subjective opinions or giving rationale unless the teacher asks for clarity.
Got it.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now let's move towards what you think the most impactful statement would be to share to the teacher where learning could have been more effective.
So I liked what Angela was saying. It kind of what she fed off of what I had stated about learning would be most effective if students had an opportunity to collaborate on their
Mhm.
responses before reporting out. Because as she was saying, they may get insight from their peers to possibly change their way of thinking or have them see it a different way, which could have led to them changing their position physically. So I think the collaboration, hearing from peers is powerful.
I think my number one was that if it had been connected to the lesson that they were about to go into, so it was like fresh on their mind about a position to persuade someone from the essay that they were working on.
And I'm just typing this out. So learning could have been more effective for all students who had clear connections related to persuasive writing. Am I getting that right?
Or to the essay that they had previously read.
Right. Right. So now that we have these all jotted down so we can see them together, one way so the feedback is most impactful is that we kind of want to rate, not necessarily rate, that's the wrong term, kind of organize all of the statements so it flows really nicely. So are there any in the chat where it says where learning was most effective, that it could be a really nice segue to learning could have been more effective? Are there any connections?
I think the one that says learning was most effective when all students were able to participate through movement. It's a nice segment into the one where Antoinette talked about if they were able to share their reasons and collaborate with each other.
Yeah, right. So we'll just make sure that that one, when we feed back to the teacher, is the last one we share. So then it would be a nice segue.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Right. And seamless.